Gracie Kelly signed the divorce papers on Valentine's Day at exactly 7 a.m., left them on the marble kitchen island of the penthouse she'd shared with Brian Miller for 3 years, and walked out with one suitcase and zero explanations. She didn't leave a note, didn't leave forwarding information, didn't leave anything except the legal documents that would end their marriage and a small white stick in the bathroom trash that she'd forgotten to hide. A positive pregnancy test showing 2 bright pink lines that meant her timing was either perfect or catastrophically wrong. Brian Miller, who controlled half the organized crime in the Northeast, who'd built an empire on never showing weakness, who'd earned his reputation by being ruthless and untouchable, came home that evening expecting to find his wife waiting with the dinner reservation he'd made weeks ago. Instead, he found divorce papers with her signature already dried, a Valentine's gift he'd custom-made sitting unopened on the counter, and when he went to the bathroom to splash cold water on his face and process that his wife had left him, a positive pregnancy test in the trash that made his knees buckle. Because Brian Miller, the man who never lost, who never showed emotion, who never let anyone see him vulnerable, had just lost the only thing that mattered. And he hadn't even known she was pregnant, hadn't known she was leaving, hadn't known that the distance between them over the past 6 months wasn't temporary stress, but her slowly, methodically planning her escape from a marriage where she'd become invisible. The Mafia boss who'd never begged for anything in his life was about to learn that some things can't be controlled, negotiated, or won back with power. Some things require becoming someone you've never been. Gracie Kelly had given him a choice without saying a word. Change everything or lose everything. Brian chose wrong at first, tried to use his empire to track her down, to force her back. Then he found her, and what she said to him broke something in his chest that power could never repair. I loved you. Past tense. And I'm not raising our child with a man who's already married to violence. Before you assume this is some redemption story where the Mafia boss immediately becomes perfect, stop right there. Brian's first move? Rage. Tracking Gracie down in 48 hours using his criminal network. Demanding she come home. Because powerful men don't accept loss, they eliminate it. But Gracie spent 6 months planning this exit. She's not the woman who stayed quiet anymore. When Brian finds her, she says 5 words that shatter him. You're too late. I'm done. Hit subscribe. What happens when a woman who won't be controlled meets a man who's never failed is the kind of collision that destroys everything before it rebuilds. That pregnancy test? Just the beginning. Gracie Kelly had loved Brian Miller for exactly 5 years, been married to him for 3, and spent the last 6 months falling systematically out of love with him while he didn't notice. She could pinpoint the exact moment things shifted. August 17th, 8 months ago. They'd been having dinner at home, a rare evening where Brian wasn't handling business that Gracie had learned not to ask about. She'd been telling him about the art gallery she wanted to open, the dream she'd been nurturing for years, when his phone rang. He'd answered it, mid-sentence, didn't even apologize. 20 minutes later, when he hung up and asked, "What were you saying?" like he actually cared, Gracie had looked at her husband and realized something devastating. He didn't see her anymore. He saw the wife accessory, the beautiful woman who made him look stable and legitimate, the respectable facade that balanced his criminal empire. But he didn't see Gracie, didn't see her dreams dissolving, didn't see her drowning in loneliness while sitting 3 feet away from him. That was the night she started planning her exit. Over the next 6 months, Gracie became meticulous. She opened a bank account in her maiden name at a bank Brian didn't control. She rented a small apartment across town using cash, listed under her friend Noelle's name. She quietly transferred her personal belongings, the things that mattered, the things Brian would never notice missing, one piece at a time. She contacted a divorce attorney who specialized in high-net-worth cases and had zero connections to Brian's world. She documented everything. The nights he came home at 3 a.m. smelling like gunpowder. The dinners he missed. The conversations he never finished. The way he looked through her instead of at her. She built an exit strategy like she was planning a heist. Which, in a way, she was stealing herself back from a marriage that had made her a ghost. And through it all, Brian noticed nothing. Because Brian Miller, brilliant tactician and feared crime lord, had one fatal flaw. He assumed Gracie would always be there. That love was permanent. That his wife's devotion was as reliable as his reputation. He was catastrophically wrong. The pregnancy test changed everything and nothing. Gracie discovered she was pregnant on February 10th, 4 days before Valentine's Day. She'd taken the test in a drugstore bathroom because she couldn't risk Brian finding it at home. Had stared at those 2 pink lines and felt her entire world tilt. She was carrying Brian Miller's child. The child of a man who'd forgotten how to love her. A man who prioritized violence over vulnerability. A man who would be a terrible father because he'd never learned how to be present. Gracie sat in that drugstore bathroom and cried for the marriage she'd wanted, the family she'd imagined, the version of Brian that existed only in her memories of their early days together. Then she made her decision. She was leaving anyway. The pregnancy just made it more urgent. She wouldn't raise a child in Brian's world of blood and secrets. Wouldn't let her baby grow up watching their mother disappear piece by piece. Wouldn't subject another human to the loneliness of loving someone who was always somewhere else. So on Valentine's Day, the ultimate irony, Gracie Kelly signed divorce papers at 7 a.m., packed her suitcase with only what mattered, and prepared to walk out of the penthouse that had been her prison for 3 years. She moved through the space one last time. The living room where she'd spent countless evenings alone while Brian handled emergencies. The kitchen where she'd made dinners he never came home to eat. The bedroom where they'd slept side by side while feeling miles apart. She left behind the diamond earrings Brian had given her for their anniversary. Left behind the designer wardrobe he'd bought to dress his wife appropriately. Left behind every expensive thing he'd purchased to prove he loved her while refusing to actually show up. She took her grandmother's necklace, the only jewelry that mattered, her art supplies, her journals, her dignity, and the divorce papers, signed and dated, left on the kitchen island where Brian would see them immediately. Gracie checked the time, 7:43 a.m. Brian would be home around 6:30 p.m. She had nearly 11 hours of head start. She grabbed her suitcase, took one last look at the space that had never really been home, and walked out. Didn't look back. Didn't cry. Didn't feel anything except relief and the weight of the secret she carried. The pregnancy test still in the bathroom trash because in her rush to leave, she'd forgotten to take it. A mistake that would change everything. Brian Miller came home at 6:34 p.m. with his arms full of Valentine's Day promises. Roses, 24 red ones from the florist Gracie loved. Expensive wine from the vineyard in Napa where they'd spent their honeymoon. And a custom jewelry box containing a necklace he'd commissioned 3 months ago. White gold with emeralds, Gracie's favorite stone. He'd remembered Valentine's Day for once. Had cleared his entire evening. Had actually planned to be present, attentive, the husband he knew he'd been failing to be lately. He was going to make it up to her. All of it. The missed dinners, the distracted conversations, the way he'd let business consume him while their marriage slowly suffocated. Tonight was going to be different. Brian opened the penthouse door calling Gracie, "I'm home," and was met with silence. The lights were off. The space felt empty in a way that made his instincts prickle. He set down the roses, the wine, the jewelry box, and moved deeper into the penthouse. That's when he saw them. Divorce papers. Sitting on the marble kitchen island under the pendant lights that Gracie had picked out when they'd moved in. Brian's mind went blank, then filled with noise, a roaring sound that might have been his pulse or his world ending. He crossed to the papers on legs that felt disconnected from his body, picked them up with hands that had ordered deaths without trembling but now shook like leaves. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner, Gracie and Kelly Miller. Respondent, Brian Michael Miller. Her signature was there. Clear. Final. Already notarized. Brian read the papers 3 times, looking for explanation. Found none. Just legal language dissolving their marriage. Her decision made without discussion, without warning, without giving him any chance to fix whatever was broken. The roses he'd brought fell from his other hand. Petals scattered across marble like blood. Brian's first emotion was rage. How dare she? How dare she leave without discussion? How dare she make decisions about their marriage, about their life together, unilaterally? His second emotion was panic. Where was she? Was she safe? What if his enemies discovered she'd left his protection? What if someone decided an estranged wife was easier leverage than a protected one? His third emotion, the one that came when he went to the bathroom to splash cold water on his face and try to think, was devastation so complete it brought him to his knees. Because there, in the trash can beside the sink, was a positive pregnancy test. Two bright pink lines that meant everything. Gracie was pregnant, with his child, and she'd left anyway. Brian picked up the test with shaking hands. Stared at those two lines like they were a language he couldn't read. She'd known. Had to have known. The test was recent. You could see it in the clarity of the lines. Which meant she'd discovered she was pregnant and still chose to leave. Chose single motherhood over staying married to him. Chose raising their child alone over giving him a chance to be a father. The implications crashed over Brian like a tidal wave. He'd failed so completely as a husband that his wife would rather face pregnancy and parenthood alone than stay with him. He'd neglected her so thoroughly that even a baby, their baby, wasn't enough reason for her to stay. He'd destroyed their marriage so comprehensively that divorce papers on Valentine's Day felt appropriate instead of cruel. Brian Miller, who never cried, who never broke, who never showed weakness, sat on his bathroom floor surrounded by Italian marble and luxury fixtures, holding a positive pregnancy test, and shattered. He'd lost her, lost their child, lost everything that mattered. And the worst part, the absolutely devastating part, was that he'd had no idea it was coming. Had been so consumed by his empire, by his power, by his endless string of business emergencies, that he'd completely missed his wife planning an escape. Had been so certain of her love, her presence, her permanence in his life, that he'd taken her entirely for granted. Had been so focused on being a successful crime lord that he'd failed completely at being a decent husband. Brian sat there for hours as night fell over the city. Sat holding the pregnancy test and divorce papers, trying to process a loss he'd never imagined possible. Because Brian Miller didn't lose. He calculated. Strategized. Won. But you couldn't strategize love. Couldn't calculate devotion. Couldn't win back someone who'd already decided you weren't worth staying for. And Gracie Kelly, his wife, the mother of his child, the only person who'd ever made him feel human, had decided exactly that. She'd chosen anything over him. And Brian had absolutely no idea how to live in a world where that was true. By midnight, Brian's grief had calcified into something more familiar, determination. He couldn't change what had happened, couldn't undo months of neglect. But he could find Gracie, could make sure she was safe, could demand answers. No, could ask for answers. Could try to understand why she'd felt leaving was her only option. Brian called Stellan at 12:47 a.m. His head of security answered on the second ring, voice alert despite the late hour. Boss, what do you need? Find Gracie. I don't care what resources it takes. I need to know where she is by morning. Stellan was quiet for a beat, long enough for Brian to know his enforcer was processing the implications. Mrs. Miller is missing? Mrs. Miller left. Voluntarily. But I need to know she's safe. Understood. I'm on it. Stellan was efficient. By 6 a.m., he had an address. Gracie had rented a small apartment in a neighborhood Brian would never have thought to look. Middle class, ordinary. The kind of place where people had normal jobs and normal lives and didn't need armed security. The opposite of everything Brian's world represented. By 7:30 a.m., Brian was standing outside her building. By 7:45, he was in front of her apartment door. He knocked. Heard movement inside. Footsteps. Then silence. Gracie checking the peephole, seeing him, deciding whether to open the door. Brian waited. Patient in a way he'd never had to be patient before. Finally, the door opened. Gracie stood there in pajamas, soft pants, and a worn t-shirt that had been Brian's once, back when they'd been happy. Her hair was in a messy bun. No makeup. She looked exhausted and beautiful and completely unsurprised to see him. I knew you'd find me, she said quietly. You always find what you want. The word stung. Brian pushed past the hurt. Can I come in? No. Gracie. No, Brian. We're not doing this. You don't get to show up and demand entry. You don't get to use your intimidation tactics on me. I left. That's final. Brian felt his control slipping. Felt the desperation clawing up his throat. You're pregnant. Gracie's hand went to her stomach, an unconscious, protective gesture. How did you? You left the test. In the bathroom. Her expression shifted. I meant to take that with me. Why didn't you tell me? Because it doesn't change anything. The words hit like bullets. Brian felt his knees weaken, but forced himself to stay upright. It changes everything. You're carrying my child. Our child. And I'm raising them alone. That was always the plan. You can't. Brian stopped. I tried again. Gracie, you can't raise a baby alone. You need support. Resources. Protection. I need a lot of things. You were never one of them. The cruelty of it, the absolute finality, broke something in Brian's chest. Let me in, he said again. Not demanding this time. Asking. Please. 5 minutes. Let me understand why. Gracie studied him. Whatever she saw in his face made her step back. Brian entered the small apartment. It was nothing like their penthouse. Modest furniture, limited space, art supplies scattered on a table by the window. But it felt lived in. Real. Like Gracie actually existed here instead of haunting the space. Sit. Gracie said, gesturing to the couch. Brian sat. Gracie remained standing, maintaining physical advantage, refusing to be vulnerable. Why did you leave? Brian asked. The question he'd been holding since finding the divorce papers. Because I was lonely. You were married. To me. How could you be lonely? Gracie's laugh was bitter. That's exactly the question, isn't it? How could I be married and still feel completely alone? How could I be sleeping next to you every night and still feel like I was the only person in the room? I was working. You were always working. Always handling emergencies. Always prioritizing business over me. Over us. Gracie's voice was calm, but her eyes were fierce. Do you know the last time we had a full conversation? One where you weren't distracted by your phone or thinking about some deal. Brian tried to remember. Couldn't. Exactly, Gracie said, reading his silence. You don't remember. Because it's been months. Maybe years. I became background noise in your life, Brian. The wife who existed to make you look stable. The beautiful accessory you displayed at events. But you stopped seeing me as a person. Stopped caring about my dreams. Stopped being present for anything except the parts of our marriage that benefited you. That's not. Brian stopped. Because he couldn't finish the sentence with honesty. Couldn't say it wasn't true when every word Gracie spoke was devastating in its accuracy. I spent 6 months planning my exit, Gracie continued. 6 months moving my things out piece by piece. 6 months opening accounts and finding this place and consulting lawyers. And you noticed nothing. Not one thing. That's how invisible I was to you. Brian felt shame. Actual, burning shame. For the first time in decades. I didn't realize. That's the problem. You didn't realize. Didn't see. Didn't care enough to look. I cared. I still care. Cared about having a wife. Not about having me. Gracie sat finally, exhaustion winning over her need for control. I loved you, Brian. Completely. I would have done anything for you. But love isn't enough when the other person doesn't show up. When they're always somewhere else. When you're competing with an empire and losing every single day. If you told me, I shouldn't have had to tell you. That's what you don't understand. I shouldn't have needed to beg my husband to pay attention to me. To finish a conversation without answering his phone. To remember I existed beyond being a convenient spouse. Brian had no response. Because she was right. He'd failed. Completely. Had taken Gracie for granted in ways he was only now beginning to understand. The pregnancy, he said finally. When did you find out? For days before I left. And you still left? Yes. Why? Gracie met his eyes. Because I won't raise our child in your world, Brian. I won't let them grow up watching their mother disappear. I won't subject them to the violence and secrets and constant fear. I won't let them learn that love is something you fit in between business calls. I'd rather do it alone than do it wrong. I could change. Could you? Really? Could you stop being who you are? Stop running your empire? Stop prioritizing power over people. Gracie's voice was gentle but final. I don't think you can. I don't think you even want to. And I don't blame you for that. But I won't stay in a marriage where I'm always second. Where our child would always be second. We deserve to be someone's first priority. And I've accepted that person will never be you. Brian felt his world crumbling. Gracie, please. No. I made my choice. I'm keeping it. I'm the father. I have rights. And I'm not denying them. You can see the baby. Be involved. Have whatever relationship you want to build. But I won't be your wife anymore. That's over. It doesn't have to be. Yes, it does. Gracie stood. I loved you. Past tense. And I'm not raising our child with a man who's already married to violence. Who's married to power. Who's married to everything except his actual family. The words devastated Brian more than any threat, any violence, any loss his criminal world had ever inflicted. Because Gracie wasn't wrong. He was married to his empire. Had been for years. And he'd let his actual marriage die from neglect while building his kingdom. What do you need? He asked quietly. Money? Protection? Anything. I need you to leave. I need you to respect my decision. And I need you to understand that showing up here, finding me, trying to control this, that's exactly why I left. Because you can't help but try to control everything. Including me. Brian stood. I can't just. You can. And you will. Gracie walked to the door, opened it. Goodbye, Brian. He wanted to argue. Wanted to demand. Wanted to use every tool in his arsenal to make her understand that leaving wasn't necessary, that he could fix this. But looking at Gracie's face, exhausted, resolute, done, Brian realized that every impulse he had was exactly what she'd been describing. Control, demands, refusal to accept no, the very things that had driven her away. So Brian did something unprecedented. He left, walked out of Gracie's apartment without another word, stood in the hallway as the door closed between them, and felt more powerless than he'd ever felt in his entire life. Because for the first time, Brian Miller couldn't win by being powerful. He'd have to win by being better. And he had absolutely no idea how to do that. Over the next week, Brian tried everything. He sent flowers. 24 roses with a card that said simply, I'm sorry. Gracie donated them to a hospital. He sent gifts. Designer maternity clothes, expensive vitamins, everything a pregnant woman might need. She returned them. He sent messages. Texts apologizing, asking to talk, begging for another chance. She blocked his number. He showed up at her apartment daily for a week. She didn't answer the door. On day 8, Brian sent Stellan with a message. Gracie opened the door, looked at his enforcer, and said calmly, Tell your boss that stalking his pregnant ex-wife isn't the character growth I demanded. And if he sends you again, I'm filing a restraining order. Stellan returned with the message. Brian sat in his office and realized he was making everything worse. Because everything he was doing, the pursuit, the gifts, the relentless attempts to make contact, was about control. About refusing to accept Gracie's decision. About trying to win instead of respecting her boundaries. Exactly what she'd left to escape. Brian's world was unraveling in other ways too. His second-in-command, Ronan, pulled him aside after a meeting where Brian had nearly botched a major negotiation. Boss, what's going on? You're distracted. Making mistakes. That's not like you. Brian wanted to snap that it was none of Ronan's business. Instead heard himself say, My wife left me. She's pregnant. And she won't speak to me. Ronan's expression shifted. Surprise, then understanding. That's complicated. That's an understatement. What are you going to do? I don't know. Everything I try makes it worse. Maybe stop trying, Ronan suggested. Give her space. Let her come to you. And if she doesn't, then you deal with it. But pushing someone who's already running just makes them run faster. The advice was sound. Brian hated it. Meanwhile, Gracie was building a new life. She'd opened the art gallery she'd always wanted. Small, beautiful, hers. A space called Kelly's Corner, in a neighborhood Brian would have called unsafe, but Gracie knew was just normal. She was making friends. The woman who ran the coffee shop next door brought her decaf lattes. The bookstore owner across the street saved her art books. The elderly couple upstairs checked on her regularly. Gracie had community, connection, things she'd never had in Brian's world of luxury and isolation. She was happy. One evening 3 weeks after leaving, Brian watched from across the street as Gracie laughed with a customer in her gallery. She was glowing. Pregnancy suited her, or maybe freedom suited her. Her hands moved expressively as she talked. Her smile was genuine. Her entire presence was light in a way Brian hadn't seen in years. She was better without him. The realization hit, like a bullet to the chest. Gracie wasn't miserable, wasn't struggling, wasn't regretting her decision. She was thriving, which meant leaving Brian had been the right choice for her, which meant he'd been so terrible as a husband that his absence improved her life. Brian sat in his car across from her gallery and felt something crack inside his chest. Some part of him that had been held together by pride and control and the assumption that he was needed. Gracie didn't need him. Their child wouldn't need him. He was irrelevant to their happiness, possibly detrimental to it. That night, Brian did something he'd never done in his entire life. He called a therapist. Dr. Sable's office was nothing like Brian expected, warm, comfortable, filled with books and soft lighting. The woman herself was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, with an expression that suggested she'd heard everything and wasn't easily shocked. "What brings you here, Mr. Miller?" she asked after they'd settled. "My wife left me. She's pregnant, and I don't know how to fix it. Do you want to fix it? Or do you want her back? What's the difference?" "Everything. One is about repairing damage. One is about getting what you want. They're not the same." Brian considered. "Both. I want both. Tell me about your marriage." So Brian did. Told her about meeting Gracie 5 years ago at an art show. She'd been vibrant, passionate about her work, completely unimpressed by his wealth. Told her about falling for Gracie's laugh, her intelligence, the way she saw the world. Told her about the wedding 3 years ago, the promises he'd made, and then told her about the slow deterioration, the missed dinners, the interrupted conversations, the way he'd let his business consume him while his marriage suffocated. Dr. Sable listened without judgment. "When did you last prioritize Gracie over your work?" Brian tried to remember. Couldn't. "When did you last have a conversation where you weren't distracted by your phone or thinking about business?" He couldn't recall. "Do you know what Gracie dreams about? What she's afraid of? What matters to her beyond your marriage?" Brian realized with devastating clarity he didn't. Had never asked. Had never made space for her to be more than his wife. "You don't see it, do you?" Dr. Sable said gently. "You didn't lose Gracie suddenly. You lost her gradually over years of making her feel invisible, of treating her like an accessory instead of a person, of loving the idea of having a wife more than you loved her specifically. I love her. I believe you. But love without presence is just a feeling. It's not a relationship. And Gracie needed a relationship, not just your feelings." Brian felt shame wash over him. "How do I fix it?" "You start by fixing yourself. By understanding why you prioritized everything except your marriage. By learning to be present instead of powerful. By becoming someone capable of putting another person first." Dr. Sable leaned forward. "And you accept that fixing yourself might not fix your marriage. That Gracie might not come back. That the work is worthwhile even if it doesn't get you what you want. What if I do all that, and she still won't forgive me? Then you live with it. But you become a better man anyway. For your child if not for her." Brian left the session feeling raw, exposed, and for the first time in weeks, like maybe he had a direction forward. Not winning Gracie back. Becoming someone worthy of her. Whether she ever came back or not. Brian just realized that flowers and gifts won't fix years of neglect. That his wife is genuinely happier without him. That he's been so terrible that his absence improves her life. So now he's in therapy, a mafia boss sitting on a couch talking about feelings. But here's the thing. Is he changing because he genuinely wants to be better? Or because it's the only strategy left to win Gracie back? Even Brian doesn't know yet. Subscribe to find out if redemption is real or just another manipulation. Brian committed to therapy. Twice a week, every week, no exceptions. He blocked the time on his calendar like it was a business meeting he couldn't miss. Because in a way, it was a meeting with the person he'd neglected most, himself. Dr. Sable asked hard questions. "Why do you think you prioritized work over Gracie?" Brian's first answer was automatic. "Because my business requires constant attention. Because my world is dangerous. Because..." Those are excuses. I asked why. What need was work fulfilling that your marriage wasn't? Brian sat with the question. Finally, control. At work, I know the rules. I know how to win. I know how to be successful. In my marriage, I felt uncertain. Like I didn't know how to be what Gracie needed. So I defaulted to what I knew. Power. Strategy. Things I could control. And how did that work out? I lost her. Yes, you did. The sessions were brutal. Dr. Sable didn't let Brian hide behind his defenses. Made him examine every choice, every pattern, every way he'd failed. When Gracie talked about her dreams, what did you do? I. I don't remember specific instances. That's the problem. You should remember. When the person you love shares their dreams, it should matter. It should stick. The fact that you can't recall means you weren't listening. Brian started keeping a journal. Dr. Sable's suggestion, writing down every instance he could remember of failing Gracie. Every dinner missed. Every conversation interrupted. Every time he'd chosen business over her. The list grew devastatingly long. But Brian also started making changes. He delegated more at work. Promoted Ronan to handle day-to-day operations. Created boundaries. No calls after 8 p.m. unless it was life or death. No working through meals. Actual time off. His organization was shocked. Stellan asked if he was dying. No, Brian said. I'm trying to start living. He read books Dr. Sable recommended. About emotional intelligence. About being present. About repairing broken relationships even when you don't know if they can be saved. He started noticing things he'd never noticed before. The way his enforcer Dax's wife smiled when Dax remembered to call her during the day. The way Ronan lit up when talking about his daughter's soccer games. The small moments of connection Brian had always dismissed as weakness. Maybe they weren't weakness. Maybe they were the point. 3 months after Gracie left, Brian did something else unprecedented. He wrote her a letter. Not demanding. Not bargaining. Just honest. Gracie, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect anything from you anymore. But I needed to say things I should have said years ago. You were right about everything. I did make you invisible. I did prioritize my empire over our marriage. I did answer my phone mid-conversation and act like your dreams were background noise to my important work. I did all of it. And I'm sorry. I've started therapy. I'm learning that the man I became, the one who could run an empire but couldn't maintain a marriage, wasn't someone I'm proud of. Wasn't someone worthy of you. I'm trying to change. Not because I think it will win you back, but because I want to be the kind of father our child deserves. The kind of man I should have been all along. I know I'm too late. I know you've moved on. I know the woman who would have stayed for love is gone, and the woman you are now won't stay for guilt. I just wanted you to know, I finally understand what I lost, and I'm trying to become someone who wouldn't have lost it in the first place. I hope you're happy. I hope the gallery is everything you dreamed. I hope our child knows how incredible their mother is. I'm sorry I forgot. Brian. He left the letter at her gallery after hours, slipped it under the door, and walked away without waiting to see if she'd read it. 3 days later, Gracie called. Brian answered on the first ring. Gracie, I got your letter. Her voice was cautious. I meant every word. I know. That's why I'm calling. A pause. I don't forgive you. I want to be clear about that. What you did, the years of neglect, that doesn't disappear because you went to therapy and wrote a nice letter. I know. But, Gracie took a breath. I'm 6 months pregnant, and I could use help with some things. Not money. Actual help. Building furniture. Installing the car seat. Things I can't manage alone right now. Brian's heart jumped. I'll help. Whatever you need. When? They arranged a time. Saturday afternoon. Gracie gave him her address, like he didn't already know it, but Brian didn't mention that. When Saturday came, Brian showed up with tools and zero expectations. Gracie opened the door. She was showing now, a visible bump that made Brian's throat tight. His child. Growing. Without him. Hi, she said. Hi. The crib's in there. Instructions are somewhere. Brian got to work. Assembled the crib in focused silence, aware of Gracie watching him from the doorway. You're different, she observed after an hour. How so? Calmer. More present. You haven't checked your phone once. I turned it off. This time is yours. Something shifted in Gracie's expression. You've never turned your phone off for me before. I should have. Years ago. I'm sorry I didn't. They worked in comfortable silence after that. Brian built the changing table, installed the car seat in Gracie's modest sedan, and assembled the rocker she'd bought. When he was done, Gracie made tea. They sat on her couch, careful distance between them, and existed in the same space without tension for the first time in years. Can I ask you something? Gracie said. Anything. Are you really in therapy? Or is that just something you said to get my attention? I'm really in therapy. Twice a week. I can give you Dr. Sable's number if you want to verify. Why now? Why change after I left instead of before? The question Brian had been dreading. The one he didn't have a good answer for. Because I didn't realize I was losing you until you were gone. Because I thought love was permanent. That you'd always be there. I took you for granted in ways I'm only now beginning to understand. Brian met her eyes. If I'd been paying attention, if I'd been present, maybe I would have seen it. Maybe I would have changed before losing you. But I wasn't. And I didn't. And that's on me. And if I hadn't left, would you have ever changed? Brian wanted to lie. Wanted to say he would have. But Gracie deserved honesty. Probably not. And that's the worst part. I had to lose you to learn how to love you. Gracie was quiet for a long time. That's heartbreaking. I know. For both of us. I know. She stood, signaling the afternoon was over. Brian stood too. Thank you, Gracie said. For the help. For the honesty. For not being who you were 3 months ago. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove I'm trying. I'm not promising anything. I know. But maybe you can come back next weekend. There's more to build. Brian felt hope flutter. Dangerous, fragile hope. I'll be here. As he left, Gracie said quietly, the man I married would have sent someone to build this furniture. Wouldn't have come himself. Wouldn't have turned off his phone. I'm glad he's not here anymore. Brian didn't trust himself to respond. Just nodded and left. And for the first time in months, he felt like maybe, just maybe, change was possible. Even if Gracie never forgave him. Even if she never came back. At least he was becoming someone worth knowing. Someone their child could be proud of. And that, Brian was learning, had to be enough. Over the next 8 weeks, Brian and Gracie developed a careful routine. He came to her apartment every Saturday, built furniture, organized the nursery, handled the heavy lifting Gracie couldn't manage while pregnant. They didn't discuss their relationship, didn't talk about the divorce or the future or whether forgiveness was possible. They just existed together, building a space for their child, learning to be around each other without the weight of their failed marriage crushing every interaction. Brian learned things about Gracie he'd never known. That she liked to paint while listening to jazz. That she talked to the baby while organizing tiny clothes. That she'd named the baby Claire if it was a girl, after her grandmother. Gracie learned things about Brian too. That he was patient with assembly instructions in ways he'd never been patient with her. That he remembered how she liked her tea without asking. That he looked at her bump with expression that broke her heart, longing and regret in equal measure. One Saturday in early June, 5 months after Gracie had left, Brian arrived to find her sitting on the floor of the nursery, crying. What's wrong? He was beside her immediately. Is it the baby? Are you hurt? I'm fine. The baby's fine. I'm just. Gracie wiped her eyes. I'm overwhelmed. This is a lot. Being pregnant alone. Building a whole human. Preparing to be a mother when I have no idea what I'm doing. Brian sat beside her. You're not alone. I'm here. You're here on Saturdays. That's not the same as having a partner. I know. But I'm here in whatever capacity you'll allow. Even if it's just Saturday furniture assembly. Gracie leaned her head against his shoulder. Brian went very still, afraid to move and break the moment. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Everything. Labor. Parenthood. Doing it wrong. Letting our child down the way we let each other down. You won't. You don't know that. I know you. You're the most capable person I've ever met. You left me when it would have been easier to stay. You built a business while pregnant. You're doing everything alone that should be done together. You're going to be an incredible mother. Gracie was quiet. Then, what about you? What about me? Are you going to be a good father? Brian thought about it honestly. I don't know. I never had a good example. My father was distant at best, cruel at worst. I don't know how to be something I never saw. You're already different than him. How? You're here. You're trying. You showed up even when I didn't want you to. Gracie pulled back to look at him. My father left when I was 6. Never called. Never visited. Never cared. You've been here every Saturday for 2 months. That's more than he managed in my entire childhood. That's a low bar. Maybe. But you're clearing it. That counts for something. They sat in the nursery as afternoon faded to evening, talking about childhoods and fears and the terrifying responsibility of creating a life. At some point, Gracie's hand found Brian's. He held it carefully, like she might pull away any second. She didn't. "Are you really different?" she asked quietly. "Or are you just being who I need until I come back?" "I'm different, whether you come back or not." "How do I trust that?" "You don't. Not yet. But I'll keep showing up. Keep being present. Keep proving it until you do trust it or decide you never will." Gracie studied his face. "You've changed. I see it. But change doesn't erase years of neglect, Brian. It doesn't erase loneliness. The way you made me feel invisible. I know. I'm not asking for it to. I'm just asking for the chance to be better going forward. To what end? To whatever end you'll allow. Co-parents. Friends. Maybe someday more. Or maybe just people who share a child and don't hate each other. I'll take whatever you'll give me. Why? Because you matter. Because our child matters. Because I wasted 3 years not appreciating what I had. I won't waste whatever time you give me now." Gracie was quiet for so long Brian thought he'd said something wrong. Then, "Stay for dinner." "What?" "I'm cooking pasta. It's nothing fancy. But stay. Help me eat it. Be here for something other than furniture assembly." Brian felt that dangerous hope again. "Are you sure?" "No. But I'm asking anyway." They made dinner together in Gracie's small kitchen. Nothing fancy, just pasta and sauce and a salad. But it felt domestic in ways their marble penthouse never had. They ate at her small table, talked about nothing important, laughed when Gracie complained about pregnancy cravings and Brian admitted he'd Googled what to say to pregnant women before every visit. It felt almost normal, almost like they were people instead of a crime lord and his estranged wife. When Brian left that night, Gracie said, "Same time next week? I'll be here. Bring your tools. I bought a bookshelf that needs assembly. I'll bring my tools." And Brian, "Thanks. For dinner. For listening. For not being who you were." Brian nodded, not trusting his voice. Left before the hope in his chest could grow too large. But as he drove home, he let himself believe, just for a moment, that maybe people really could change. Maybe broken things could be repaired. Maybe Gracie Kelly, the woman who'd filed divorce papers on Valentine's Day and walked away from his empire, might someday give him another chance. Not to be her husband, but to earn the right to stand beside her. To be worthy of her. To be the partner he should have been all along. Brian didn't know if it would happen, but for the first time since finding those divorce papers, he thought it might be possible. And that was enough to keep trying. Gracie just invited Brian to dinner. Willingly. After months of barely tolerating his presence. He's building furniture every Saturday, and she's starting to see the man she married instead of the crime lord who forgot her. But is this real change, or just Brian being strategic? Even more important, does it matter if the result is the same? Subscribe because what's coming will test whether Brian's transformation survives when his violent world crashes back into their carefully rebuilt peace. 6.5 months after Gracie left, Brian's carefully constructed new life collided with his old one. Ronan appeared at Brian's office looking grim. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Maddox Castellano kind." Brian felt ice in his veins. The Castellanos were old rivals, brutal, opportunistic, always looking for weakness to exploit. What does Maddox want? He knows about Gracie, about the pregnancy, about the fact that she's not living under your protection anymore. How? Someone talked, or someone saw. Does it matter? He knows, and he's making noise about using her as leverage. Brian's control shattered. He threatened her? Not directly, but the implication was clear. Hurt Gracie, hurt you. Brian was on his feet, already making calls. Full protection detail. I want Gracie secured now. Armed guards. Surveillance. Everything. Boss, she'll notice. I don't care. Protect her. That's not negotiable. Within 3 hours, Brian had a discreet security detail on Gracie's building. Within 6 hours, he had surveillance covering every approach to her apartment and gallery. But he still had to tell her. Because this was exactly what she'd left to escape. His world. His violence. His enemies targeting her to get to him. Brian went to her apartment that evening. Knocked. Gracie answered looking surprised. It's not Saturday. I know. I need to talk to you. It's urgent. She let him in. He could see she was nervous. Brian showing up unscheduled meant something was wrong. There's a threat, he said without preamble. A rival organization. They know you exist. Know you're pregnant. And they're looking for ways to hurt me. Which means they'll hurt me. Gracie's voice was flat. I've assigned protection. Full detail. You won't see them, but they're there. Watching. Making sure you're safe. This is why I left. Gracie's calm shattered. This is exactly why I left, Brian. Because your world doesn't have boundaries. Because violence follows you everywhere. And now it's following me and our baby. I know. No, you don't know. You don't know what it's like to be pregnant and scared and realizing that even after leaving, I'm still not safe. That your past is still my present. That our child will grow up with bodyguards and threats and danger because of who you are. If I could undo it, I would. If I could erase every choice that brought danger to your door, I would. But I can't. Brian's voice was raw. All I can do is protect you. Let me protect you. I don't want to need your protection. I wanted a normal life. A safe life. A world where my child doesn't need armed guards. I know. And I'm sorry. But right now, your safety matters more than your independence. Gracie hated that he was right. Hated that even after rebuilding her life, Brian's world still controlled her. How bad is the threat? Bad enough that I'm not taking chances. Maddox Castellano is dangerous. Unpredictable. If he thinks hurting you would hurt me, he'll try. Can't you? I don't know, negotiate with him. Not without showing weakness. And in my world, weakness gets exploited. Then what? I just live with guards and fear for the rest of my life. Until I eliminate the threat, which I'm working on. Gracie sank onto her couch, hands on her stomach. I'm 8 months pregnant, Brian. I'm about to have a baby. And now I have to worry about assassins. Brian knelt in front of her. You don't worry about anything. That's my job. You focus on the baby. On staying healthy. I'll handle Maddox. How? You don't want to know. Gracie looked at him. At the man who'd changed so much, but whose past was still dangerous. Will people die? Probably. Because of me. Because of me. Because of choices I made long before we met. This isn't on you, Gracie. It's on me. My world. My consequences. That affects our child. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I can't change who I was. All I can do is try to be better now. That night, Brian stayed at Gracie's apartment. She didn't ask him to. But when he said, I should stay, in case something happens, she didn't argue. He slept on her couch. Or tried to. Mostly stayed awake, listening to every sound, hyper-aware of every potential threat. At 2 a.m., Gracie appeared in the living room. Can't sleep either? No. She sat beside him. They didn't talk. Just sat in the darkness together. After a long time, Gracie said, I'm scared. I won't let anything happen to you. I believe you. But I'm still scared. For me. For the baby. For the life we're bringing them into. Brian had no good answer. Because she was right to be scared. When this is over, he said quietly, when Maddox is handled and the threat is gone, I'll step back. From the organization. I'll transfer control. Become a civilian. Remove the target from you and Claire. Gracie turned to him. You do that. I'd do anything to keep you both safe. That's your whole life. No. You and Claire, that's my whole life. Everything else is just power. And power is worthless if I'm alone. Gracie didn't respond. Just took his hand and held it. They sat like that until dawn. Two people bound by a child and a past they couldn't escape and a future that was uncertain. But for those few hours, they weren't alone. And that was something. The threat from Maddox Castellano escalated over the following week. A car followed Gracie home from her gallery. Security intercepted before it got close, but the message was clear. A note was left at her building. Simple. Direct. The wife. The child. Leverage. Maddox was hunting, and Brian's protection was the only thing keeping Gracie safe. Brian called a meeting with his inner circle. Stellan, Ronan, Dax. The men who'd helped him build and run his empire. I'm stepping back, he announced. The room went silent. Boss, what? Ronan finally said. I'm transferring control. Of everything. The operations, the territory, all of it. You'll take over. I'll transition to legitimate businesses only. Why? Because my wife and child are targets because of what I am. And I won't accept that anymore. Stellan leaned forward. This is about the threat? From Maddox. This is about every threat, current and future. As long as I'm running this organization, Gracie and Claire will be in danger. So I'm not running it anymore. They'll see it as weakness, Dax warned. Rivals will move on our territory. There'll be chaos. Let them. I don't care about territory anymore. Boss, I'm not asking for opinions. I'm informing you. I'm out. Effective immediately after we handle Maddox. Brian left the meeting and went to Gracie. She was at her gallery, working despite his pleas that she stay home where security was tighter. We need to talk, he said. Gracie locked the door, flipped the sign to closed. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I made a decision. Brian took a breath. I'm dismantling my organization, transferring control to Ronan, walking away from the criminal operations entirely. Gracie stared at him. What? I can't protect you and run an empire. So I'm choosing you. Brian, that's your whole life. No. You and Claire, that's my whole life. Everything else was just power. And power is worthless if I lose you. But you said stepping back shows weakness. It does. And I don't care. Let them think I'm weak. Let them move on my territory. None of it matters compared to you being safe. Gracie sat down heavily. You're serious. Completely. What will you do? Run the legitimate businesses. Security consulting. Use my tactical skills legally. Build something that doesn't come with targets on my family. Your family? Yes. You and Claire. However you'll have me. As co-parents. As friends. As whatever you're willing to give me. But I want you both safe more than I want power. Gracie's eyes filled with tears. You're giving up everything. I'm giving up what was making me lose everything that matters. What if I still don't come back? What if you do all this and I choose to raise Claire alone anyway? Brian had thought about this. Had accepted it. Then I did it anyway. Because being the kind of father Claire deserves was never conditional on you forgiving me. I should have been better when we were married. Now I'm trying to be better even without you. Because that's what you deserved all along. Someone who changes because it's right, not because he might get something in return. Gracie stood, moved to him, took his face in her hands. You've really changed. I'm trying. I see that. I've seen it for months. But this is different. This is a sacrifice. This is choosing correctly. Finally, Gracie kissed him. Just once. Soft and brief and full of something that might have been hope. I don't know if we can fix us, she said. But I'm willing to try. Actually try. If you're really out. If you're really leaving that world behind. Brian felt his heart stutter. You mean? I mean let's start over. New. Not as who we were, but who we are now. Slow. With therapy and honesty, and actually building something instead of trying to resurrect what died. Deal. Whatever you want. However long it takes. Okay. Gracie smiled through tears. Okay. 3 days later, Brian eliminated Maddox Castellano. Not personally, but he orchestrated it. One final strategic play. One last use of his power before walking away. Maddox's operation was dismantled. His people scattered. The threat to Gracie neutralized permanently. And then Brian did something unprecedented in his world. He announced his retirement. Called every major player in the Northeast. Told them he was out. Transferring all criminal operations to Ronan. Keeping only legitimate businesses. Some thought he was lying. Some thought it was a strategy. Some thought he'd gone soft. Brian didn't care what they thought. He cared that when he went to Gracie's apartment that evening, she opened the door with a smile instead of fear. It's over, he said. Maddox. The threat. All of it. And your organization? Ronan's now. I'm officially a civilian. Just a man with a security consulting business and a very pregnant ex-wife who's giving him a second chance. Gracie pulled him inside. Not ex-wife yet. The divorce isn't final. What? I never filed the final paperwork. Kept putting it off. Telling myself it was because I was busy. But maybe, she met his eyes. Maybe I was waiting to see if you'd become someone worth staying married to. And you're getting there. We're not fixed. We have a lot of work to do. But you're getting there. Brian kissed her. Actually kissed her. Like he meant it. Like she was his, and he was hers, and they were building something real. I love you, he said against her mouth. I never stopped. I just forgot how to show it. I love you too. Even when I didn't want to. Even when I left. I loved you through all of it. So we try. We try. 1 week later, Gracie went into labor. Brian drove her to the hospital, held her hand through contractions, stayed present through every moment of the birth. Their daughter, Claire Josephine Miller, was born at 3:47 a.m. Tiny, perfect, screaming with impressive lung capacity. When the nurse placed Claire in Brian's arms for the first time, he cried. Actually cried. Big, messy tears that Gracie had never seen from him. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She is. I'm terrified." "Me too. What if I mess this up?" "Then we mess it up together. And we will do better tomorrow." Brian looked at Gracie, exhausted, beautiful, the woman who'd left him and taught him how to be human again. "Thank you." "For what?" "For leaving. For showing me what I was losing. For giving me the chance to be better. For Claire. For everything." Gracie smiled. "Thank you for becoming someone worth coming back to." 6 months after Claire's birth, Gracie and Brian were learning to be something they'd never been before, actual partners. They were in couples therapy every week. Dr. Sable pushed them both, made them confront the past, acknowledge the hurt, build new patterns. It wasn't easy. Some sessions left them exhausted. Some reopened wounds they'd thought were healed. But they kept showing up. Brian had fully transitioned out of criminal operations, ran a successful security consulting firm that used his tactical skills legally. He still had enemies. You didn't just leave organized crime and become beloved, but he was no longer a major player. No longer a target worth the effort. Gracie's gallery was thriving. She'd expanded, hired an assistant, started teaching art classes on weekends. They had dinner together 3 nights a week. Claire stayed with Brian every other weekend. He'd baby-proofed his penthouse, hired a nanny for backup, learned to change diapers, and give bottles like a pro. They were co-parenting. Successfully. Building trust slowly. But they still weren't together. Not officially. Living separately. Dating like new people instead of married once. One evening in late November, almost a year after Gracie had filed for divorce, they were giving Claire her bath together at Gracie's apartment. Claire was 6 months old, all giggles and splashes, delighted by everything. "She has your smile," Brian observed. "And your stubborn streak. Watch." Gracie tried to wash Claire's hair. Claire protested loudly. "See? Won't let anyone do anything for her. Wonder where she gets that." Gracie splashed him. Brian splashed back. Claire laughed like it was the funniest thing ever. After the bath, after Claire was asleep in her crib, Gracie and Brian sat on the couch with tea. "Can I ask you something?" Gracie said. "Always. Are we going to keep doing this? Dating while married but separated? Co-parenting from different homes? Or do we eventually decide one way or the other?" Brian set down his tea. "What do you want?" I asked first. "Fair." Brian thought about how to say it. "I want you back. Want us back. Want to live together, wake up next to you, be an actual family. But I also know we're not ready. That we need time. That rush would break everything we've rebuilt. What if we're never ready? Then we stay like this. Co-parents who care about each other. That's enough if it has to be." Gracie was quiet. "Then, I'm almost ready. Almost. I'm not scared of you anymore. Not scared you'll go back to being the man who made me invisible. I see the changes. I trust them." She paused. "But I'm scared of me. Scared I'll fall back into old patterns. That I'll stop demanding what I need. That I'll let myself be background again. You could never be background. Not anymore. I won't let you. Promise. Promise. You tell me when I'm slipping. When I'm distracted. When I'm choosing wrong. And I'll listen. Actually listen. And if I can't always speak up, if I slip into silence, then I pay attention. I notice. I ask. I create space for you to be heard even when you're quiet." Gracie studied him. "You've really learned. I had the best teacher. You. Leaving. Showing me what loss felt like. That's depressing motivation. It's honest motivation." Gracie took his hand. "I think I'm ready. Not to move in together. Not yet. But to stop dating like strangers. To acknowledge we're rebuilding us instead of starting over. What does that look like? Staying over sometimes. Holidays together. Making plans that go past next weekend. Actually talking about the future. I want that. All of it. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Let's try." They kissed. Not desperate. Not claiming. Just 2 people choosing each other again. Carefully. Intentionally. With full knowledge of what they'd broken and what they were building. 3 months later, Gracie and Brian spent Valentine's Day together. Exactly 1 year after she'd filed divorce papers and walked out. This time, she walked toward him instead. Brian cooked dinner at her apartment. Nothing fancy, just pasta and wine and conversation that flowed easily. After Claire was asleep, they sat on the couch and Brian pulled out a small box. "What's this?" Gracie asked. "Open it." Inside was a ring. Not the one he'd given her when they got engaged. A new one. Simpler. More meaningful. "I'm not proposing," Brian said quickly. "We're still married. Legally. You never filed the final paperwork." "I know. But I wanted to give you something. A new ring. For the new version of us. The one we're building." Gracie held the ring. White gold. A single small diamond. Nothing ostentatious. Just beautiful. "It's perfect. Will you wear it?" "Not as an engagement ring. As a promise. That I'll keep being better. That I'll keep showing up. That I'll keep choosing you even when it's hard." Gracie slipped the ring onto her right hand. "I'll wear it. And I promise the same. To keep demanding what I need. To keep being honest. To keep choosing us even when it's scary." They sat together as night fell over the city. Two people who'd broken each other and somehow found a way to rebuild. "I'm glad you left," Brian said quietly. "What?" "I'm glad you filed those divorce papers. I'm glad you walked out. Because if you hadn't, I never would have changed. I would have kept being terrible until there was nothing left to save." "I'm glad I left too," Gracie admitted. "And I'm glad you became someone worth coming back to. Are we going to make it?" "I think so. As long as we keep trying." "Deal." They kissed. And for the first time in years, it felt like a beginning instead of an ending. Because sometimes love doesn't survive. Sometimes it dies and has to be completely rebuilt. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very committed and willing to do the work, the rebuilding creates something stronger than what was lost. Gracie Kelly had filed for divorce on Valentine's Day. 1 year later, she was falling in love with her husband again. Not the man he'd been, the man he'd become. And Brian Miller, former Mafia boss, current security consultant, full-time father and part-time disaster, had learned that being powerful wasn't the same as being worthy. That empires meant nothing without someone to share them with. That changing for the right person was the bravest thing you could do. Gracie had left him to save herself. And in doing so, she'd saved him too. Some endings are really beginnings disguised. Some divorce papers lead to better marriages. And some pregnancy tests left in trash cans break Mafia bosses just enough to rebuild them into men. This was their story. Broken. Rebuilt. Real. And finally, after everything, theirs. The end. She filed divorce papers on Valentine's Day and made a Mafia boss dismantle his empire to prove he changed. Then they fell in love again, for real this time, with therapy and boundaries and actual partnership. Gracie Kelly walked away to save herself and accidentally saved Brian too. Subscribe for next week's story. A woman discovers her fiancé has a secret family, so she teams up with his other wife to destroy him together. It's vengeful. It's brilliant. See you there? Real talk. Did Brian deserve Gracie's second chance after everything? A. Yes, he genuinely changed and sacrificed everything. B. And O. Change doesn't erase years of neglect. C. Both. It worked for them, but isn't universal. D. None of that matters because Gracie filed divorce papers on Valentine's Day and made a Mafia boss go to therapy, and that's iconic. Drop your answer. Would you have given Brian another chance or raised Claire alone? Also, is change that only happens after someone leaves you real? Or does rock bottom requirement make it less meaningful?